there's a normal process for how you're supposed to make a film. And I did it kind of ass backwards. So there's a lot of things missing in the film, and I'm sure that we will talk about that later. And one of the things that's missing is the reason why I made it. And as Paula said, I'm a journalist. I'm the Israel-Palestine correspondent for the independent network called The Real News, which you will also see in the film. And as someone who grew up in the settlements and ended up covering the occupation, it's been a long process, as I'm sure some of you have gone through. And as I became a journalist over the last 6 years covering the occupation, I noticed this thing that when I was talking to friends and colleagues and school teachers, you know, I would come back home from the West Bank, drop my equipment, and tell people, you'll never believe what I saw today, you know, the checkpoints and the mass arrests and all these things. And I would get showered with their bucket of facts. That's how I'd like to describe it. So I would present to them my big bucket of facts and then present theirs. And then we would shower each other with buckets of facts. And so we were covered in facts and drowning in facts, and no one was listening to anybody, and nobody was hearing anybody, and they left the room as an Islamophobic Zionist, and I was a self-hating Jew anti-Zionist. You've had this experience? So I realized fairly early on that it's not about the facts. So what I noticed as I was talking to people, and I think that as a critical Israeli, my main job is to target the Israeli audience, and of course this film started its way in Israel, premiering in Israel, showing all over Israel, is that the Palestinians are talking about dispossession and colonialism and occupation and the Nakba. And we as, hello, welcome. There's some seats here in the front. And the Israelis, we are talking about the Holocaust and terrorism and existential fears. So it's not that we weren't hearing each other, we were not talking about the same things. So that's all I wanted to say. This is a film that is about the distance between these conversations, about what is between these two planets, that we don't hear each other. So I really hope that you will stay for Q&A. If you have questions or comments, or if you want to yell at me, please, I welcome that. Stay and do that. And if someone can hit the lights, we can start. I think that here in Vienna, and especially outside of Israel, the task that you have to serve is quite different than the task that me and other Israelis have to serve. Because I think that if we are honest with ourselves, critical Israelis and the left in Israel in general has lost the fight. And fascism is now rising very quickly in Israel. As a journalist, I've been covering the rise of the Israeli neo-fascism over the last 6 years. And it is accelerating, and it's growing exponentially, and it's becoming really quite terrifying. And this summer, much of our anonymity as Israelis has been stolen from us by fascist groups. And so when your anonymity is stolen, your work becomes ever more difficult in a society where the consensus has shifted from one of shattered hopes about this American so-called mediated peace process, and generation after generation after generation watching yet another attempt at living together fail. And today the general consensus is against what you call coexistence. And in fact, into this political void, which was created by the failure of the Israeli and Palestinian negotiators through the Americans to reach peace, the void that is created in that space is filled up by the most organized people in society, which is the fascist right. And we're seeing now that the debate in Israel is no longer about how to resolve the conflict, but about whether to expel the remaining Palestinians or kill them all. And this is a very terrifying outcome. But I think that regardless of the efficacy of what we are doing, we have to continue doing it. And this summer, when so much has been destroyed, both by the constant bombardment of Gaza and by the rise of this neo-fascism and by just the total feeling that everyone is a target, if you are a Palestinian or a lefty, I sort of started to think a bit more philosophically about why the hell am I doing this. And I haven't come up with any good answers, but I'm a Brodskyite in the sense that I really value the work of the Russian Soviet-era poet Josip Brodsky, who was sent to jail for a long time for writing poetry. And the poetry that he wrote was not critical of the state. He just wrote poetry, but it wasn't in celebration of the state, and so they put him in jail. And when they finally let him out, they told him either you stop writing or you get exiled or killed. And he couldn't stop writing. He couldn't explain why, but he simply could not be silenced. And so, of course, he was exiled, and he found himself in America, and eventually he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And if I was to summarize the enormous body of profound work that he has contributed to the planet, I would say that his main message was that freedom is a form of prison, and prison is a form of freedom. And I think that we have to continue this work simply because we cannot be something else. This is what we have to do. This is because this is the only way we know how to be. Once you know something, you cannot unknow it. And as the Chinese proverb goes, to know and not to act is not to know. So I don't know if there's any point in making these films, but I keep doing them. And I think that your work here is obviously accelerating, attested to simply by the number of people in this room. It's really impressive that you can get so many people on such a shitty night to come out and watch such a difficult film. So I think that's, if I was to then add to that a little bit, I don't really believe in solutions. But I think that the work out here has to be between putting pressure on the Israeli state and the general powers that be to bring balance to the situation. Obviously, as we all know, the balance is highly skewed in the favor of Israel. And there's a million ways to do that. As individuals, I guess our only power is using our dollar and using our voice through boycotts and sanctions and divestments and other actions. And of course, helping in contributing in so many ingenuitive and wonderful projects that are envisioning a different kind of future. And the work that we have to do at home is to tackle this collective denial. And also I would say that I don't believe that the Jewish people nor the European people have ever really successfully tackled the collective trauma inherited by European anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. And I think that part of our work has to do also with working on collective trauma healing. That's all I know. Yeah, I don't think that there's like good Israelis and bad Israelis, and that those of us who are critical are somehow better, but I can tell you that my process of questioning started very simply. I went to university in Canada, and for the first time in my life met a Palestinian person and had a conversation. If you want, I can tell the story. It's kind of embarrassing. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I grew up in the West Bank. As you probably know, the West Bank is a highly segregated place. And there's no space for you to just sit and meet and talk and like equals, like human beings. And when I went to university in Canada, we had, first semester in the winter, I came to campus one day and the whole campus was covered in the flag of Israel. The entire campus was one giant flag of Israel. And as I walked into the Student Union building, at that time I wasn't very questioning. In the auditorium we had this huge row of tables and flags of Israel everywhere, and it said, Israel Week. And on this long line of tables was these displays. Like, Israel is the most democratic state in the Middle East. Israel is the most gay-friendly state in the Middle East. Israel has the best tomatoes in the Middle East. And all this shit. And, sorry, we swear a lot in Israel. I don't know if that's an answer. And for me, I mean, it was, obviously I was still very much with the project, but it just kind of looked strange. Like, to have Israel Week in some university in the middle of nowhere in Canada is like having Austria Week in some university in Zimbabwe. I mean, no sense to me. So I came up to them and I kind of tried to ask, well, what are you doing? And I found this row of these cheery, uppity 21-year-old girls who said, hi, can I talk to you about Israel? And I found out that the longest that any one of them has been in Israel is for 1 week on a birthright trip. So, in my arrogance, I just thought that they were idiots, and I went on my way. Fast forward 1 year, again, winter, semester, again, Israel week. And for a whole year, they were just sitting somewhere in the back of my mind, and they were irritating me. And I couldn't figure out why, but they were irritating me. And so I come to campus, frustrated that there's this thing, and who are these women? Who are these people? They're not Israelis, I'm Israeli, I know, they don't know, I know. Now, obviously I was with the project, but I'm a Russian Israeli. So I didn't have any illusions about what Israeli democracy looks like. And it seemed to me dishonest. So for the entire week, I was kind of preparing psychologically. I was going to go to them and say something. I didn't know what, but I was going to say something. And also during that week, this is the Canadian winter, yeah? And outside of the Student Union building, in the snow, stood this girl. And for the whole straight week, she read the names of every person killed in the Holocaust. Now, in Israel, despite what might seem logical, we don't really talk about the Holocaust so much. And it's not fashionable anyway, it's not a sexy conversation. And people my age don't really talk about the Holocaust, and it just seems strange to me that these people were presenting some kind of propaganda thing and the Holocaust, and that this was Israel. So on the last day of Israel week, I was going to go up to them and I was going to say something. And as I came to the campus, I saw in the end of all these tables a different kind of table with a different kind of flag. And I thought, okay, maybe it's like International Week or something. And I came out to them. And there was this table of books, and there's this nice girl standing behind it. And I come to her and I say, hi, what is this flag? Who are you? What are you doing? She goes, hi, my name is Galia. I'm an anti-Zionist Jew, and that's the flag of Palestine. And she pissed me off. And I found myself just screaming at her, like that, defending these idiots. What? We can't have 1 week out of the year to talk about Israel? Why are you bringing here this Arab propaganda, you terrorist-loving anti-Semite? I don't know where it came from, but it's, there it was. And my mind was flashing red. And I was shaking. And, if you live in Israel long enough, in Israel-Palestine, especially in Palestine, if you live there long enough, you eventually lose people. Because it's a conflict, it's a war. It's not a symmetrical conflict, but it's a conflict. And this was in the height of the Second Intifada. And a year and a half before then, I lost my best friend in a suicide bombing. And in that moment, I was teleported back to that scene. And I don't know if you've been through a suicide bombing, but there's something about the burning and the people screaming and the smoke and the smell. There's the smell of burning plastic and metal and flesh. And I'm standing there screaming at her, and I smell that smell. And the words, everyone I love who died is your fault, come flashing across my mind. And I broke. As a human being, I just broke. And I found this nice anti-Zionist Jewish girl named Galia hugging me and telling me in Hebrew, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And that moment, everything changed. The next day, I was standing again in the Student Union building, and this guy comes up to me and he asks for directions, how to get to some building. So, I say, go straight, whatever. And he goes, you have an accent, where are you from? And I say, I'm an Israeli. A little bit less proud of that than I was the day before. I just say, I'm Israeli. And he goes, Wallah, I'm Palestinian. Oh, it's harvest season now with the olives. Don't you wish we were back home right now to harvest? And anyway, so great to meet you, Yani. Have a great day. Bye. And he goes. And I'm standing there, clinging to my purse. Now, I wasn't clinging to my purse because I was afraid he's going to steal it. I was clinging to it because I was sure he was going to kill me. But he didn't. And that was amazing to me, because the only way that I, until that point, have ever heard about Palestinians, have ever thought about Palestinians, the only thing I was ever told to me about Palestinians is within the paradigm of them trying to kill us. Obviously, we don't learn anything about them. We don't really learn anything at all about our history. And after that, slowly, it happened. Or maybe very fast, but I'm still in the process, you know, as you think you finally understand, you discover there's a whole other layer, and a whole other layer, and a whole other layer, and it's endless helix of understanding. That's all I know. If you look by numbers, during the first Lebanon War in 1982, we actually had hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. Also, a few days after the occupation of the West Bank, the very first anti-Zionist, really strong Israeli movement called Matzpen published a really important notice in Haaretz newspaper saying that if Israel doesn't immediately withdraw from the West Bank, it will end up in endless occupation, as we have seen has been the case. But Matzpen, at its height, was 25 people. And the large hundreds of thousands of people movement in the 80s was a Zionist left that collapsed within 1 week in October 2000, when it was presented with some very basic realities. So the number of people today in Israel that are willing to say, I am against this entire nationalist project, and I will put my body as a shield to my comrades in the West Bank as they are getting shot at. We've never seen such numbers as we see now, but I think if you got all of them together, you could maybe fill a large room. Yeah. Maybe a very large room, but still a large room, not more than that. But I will say that Israel, in fact, in my opinion, and I hope I'm wrong, is a laboratory, Israel-Palestine. Of course, in the obvious sense, it's a laboratory for weapons and homeland security technologies and crowd dispersal technologies tested on the Palestinians and sold to the world. But maybe more than that, it's a laboratory of this idea that you can have globalized capital without globalized migration. That you can have a state for one ethnic group only and build walls around it and not allow anyone else in and try to slowly get as much of the indigenous population out as possible. And in fact, in that sense, I think it's a laboratory for Europe and America largely. Because this is, I think, where the world, or at least where the right is pushing towards. You know, today Israel, which is located, Israel-Palestine, located in a place geographically that has historically been the crossroads of human migration since Africans left Africa and became, you know, you guys. And in this place, of all places, Israel built a 240-kilometer wall with Egypt, the wall in the West Bank, walls with everyone. And here in Europe, we are hearing the same things echoing, a little bit more politely maybe, a little bit more invisibly maybe, but the idea that this is the Austrian state for the Austrians and new immigrants are not welcome is also alive here. And in Israel, we are just much more direct, much more visible, and we are in a conflict, in a political turmoil. And so in that sense, everything is extreme and louder and more in your face. And I think that because Israel is getting away with it, with this slow administrative ethnic cleansing, because Israel is getting away with it, the West can easily say, well, Israel is a democratic, normal state, and they're doing it, why can't we do it? So Switzerland is now buying drones from Israel, I'm sure Austria is not far behind them. But as far as the opinion in favor of Israel, yeah, I think it's changing in the sense that there's a lot more people, thanks in part to the insane policies of our governments, thanks in part to Palestinian activists around the world and boycott movements and the internet. A lot more people understand exactly what Zionism is, understand exactly what is happening in Israel-Palestine, and are active about it. As I said, to know and not to act is not to know. But the right is also winning. Also here, we are seeing the rise of fascism also here, or maybe right-wing politics. So the fight that I think, maybe this is a philosophical answer, but I think that before major change happens in the world, humanity tends to clinch, and then it lets go. And I think that we are now in this moment where the borders will close, militarism will increase, and then the world will somehow have to deal with the fact that humans migrate. This is the history of humanity. And having ethnocracies is just not legitimate. I hope. This film was originally called 7 Deadly Myths. And the reason for that is because when I discovered the Nakba, it changed my life. At that point, I was already a journalist, and I already thought I was good. I understood the occupation. Occupation has to end. Anyway, you know, maybe we did some things bad, but also they did some things bad. And then I discovered that clip by Tikva Honik Parnas, and it drove me to start reading. And I picked up Ilan Paquet's book, and it opened my mind. And I decided, oh my God, I finally understand what's happening. I'm going to go and I'm going to make a film, based on the book of Simcha Flapan, who's an Israeli new historian, who in '87 published a summary of the work of the new historians called The Birth of Israel, Myths and Realities. And the book is divided into 7 myths, the 7 big founding myths of Israel. Something like the first one is that the Palestinians rejected partition and launched the war, that we accepted partition and were forced into war, that the refugees fled of their own accord, all these myths. And I was going to go, and I found all the new historians, and I contacted them. They said, sure, come interview me. And I went to England, and I went to Israel, and I found them all, and all of them, I interviewed them all. And I was going to make a film that will prove without a shadow of a doubt that much of what we believe is mythology. And I was going to show it in Israel, and everyone's going to change their minds, and the conflict will end, and everything will be fine. And then I grew up a little bit. And this was around the time when I understood that it's not about the facts. And the more I discovered, the more I was telling people around me what I was discovering, the more I was surprised that I wasn't getting this, oh my God, look on their face. So I understood it was about something so much more than that, because the film is dedicated, as you saw in the beginning, to the sociologist and psychosociologist Stanley Cohen, who actually founded the field of collective denial. He was born in South Africa, lived 12 years in Israel, and then went to England and wrote about collective denial. And in 2001 published an incredible book called States of Denial, Knowing About Atrocities and Suffering. And that launched the field of collective denial as a study, which is amazingly relatively new. And I realized when I was reading his book that this is exactly what was happening with the people I was meeting. Except he wasn't in his 20s like me. He had this revelation when he was 9. He was 9 years old in apartheid South Africa. He comes from a fairly wealthy Jewish family. And one night in the winter, he was sitting in his home looking out the window at night. And the guard to their home was a black guy. And of course, all the servants were black. And he had the following thoughts, which is amazing because he was 9. He thought, how come all the people serving us and out there in the cold are black, and all the people here in the warm are white? And how come no one seems to talk about that? And of course, this led to later his work and all that. And when I realized that this is what we are in, I started to study collective denial. And in fact, I would separate it into 3 or 4 phases. And the first one is, I don't know. The denial that comes with, I don't know, which we've all gone through here in Europe with the Holocaust and us in Israel. And you can no longer say in Israel, I don't know. Because, of course, we had the new historians. You cannot say, I don't know. The next phase is, okay, maybe some bad things happen, but it's not as bad as it sounds. We've gone through that. The next phase, and this is where I think most of Europe is at, and also us, is, okay, it happened. Okay, it was terrible, but it's not me. This phase is also associated with separating the moral ramifications of what it means to accept what happened and the actual thing that happened. Taking responsibility comes first of all with saying, I did it. My grandfather was a Nazi. My grandfather kicked out the Palestinians. Saying those words. Now, my grandfather wasn't a Nazi, I'm saying, as an example. And of course, I started this tour in Germany. And, you know, as a journalist, you cover all kinds of crazy situations, and yet I don't usually feel afraid, mostly because I have a camera in my hands and it separates me from the situation. But I landed in Berlin 2 weeks ago, and as I stepped out of the plane and started meeting Germans, like, I cannot explain it, but I'm telling you, in 2015, I was terrified. I was terrified of the Germans. Yeah, I can't explain it. And the first day I went to the house of the woman who organized this incredible tour through Germany and Switzerland and Austria. And I sat with her, and as I was going into her building, she lives like in a relatively normal building in Berlin, I saw on the ground they had 4 bronze plates with some names and some dates and something. So I go inside, and we sit and we talk, oh great, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I go, by the way, what was the plaque outside your house about? And she goes, oh, that's a project in Berlin, every building where there were Jews, when they were murdered by the Nazis. Anyway, in front of the building we put their names and how they were killed. Israel, as defined by the Israeli political scientist Olan Iflachel, is an ethnocracy. And in fact, it's not a unique case in that way. There's many ethnocracies, less now, but an ethnocracy is loosely defined as a state meant in the service of one ethnic group as a dominating group over other ethnicities. And in Israel, it's the Jews. But, I mean, there's ethnocracies also in Indonesia. There's South Africa was an ethnocracy. Estonia was an ethnocracy. Macedonia transitioned out of ethnocracy. So we have a lot of models of how to become democracies. And of course, in an ethnocracy, the lands, the resources, the rights are all diverted to the benefit of the dominating ethnic group. And ethnocracies, what they have in common is that they have a thin layer of democracy, which they constantly project to the world. So in a sense, if you're a Jew in Israel, especially if you are from the founder group, which is the Ashkenazi Jews from the European countries, West European countries, you have a vibrant, rich democracy, which is a lot more active, in fact, than many other democracies. But if you are from the groups that are the later immigrants, such as the Mizrahim, the Jews from the Arab world and North Africa, the Russians and Ethiopians, or you are from the indigenous group, that democracy doesn't really apply to you, because of course it serves the dominant ethnic group and inside of it the elite. And today in the capitalist society you also have the group which is the foreigners. In Israel it's the migrant workers and the African refugees, which are, while having no history in conflict with this ethnocracy, are constantly its victim. So I think Israel projects to the world this image of democracy largely because it's a new state and it has to identify its own self. It's a state full of contradictions, but also like all ethnocracies, it is unstable. And it's very aware of its instability. And like anyone under threat, it projects violence in these periodic attacks on the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and so on. So I personally think that Israel is an ethnocracy, not a democracy. And once you start understanding how ethnocracies work, not just Israel, also Indonesia with the Tamils, you see that the same mechanisms happen again and again. And it gives me also a lot of hope, because a lot of states transition out of ethnocracy. But no, I don't think Israel is a democracy. There's a really great propaganda video that was funded by the Israeli settler community, the Israeli Settler Council, which is a body partially funded by the state. And the video is called The Demographic Demon. And in the video, which, you know these videos where like this hand draws very quickly and someone explains, voice of God kind of narration, looks like that. So this white screen, and this friendly guy comes on the stage, and there's this cartoon of a red demon, and the guy says, are you kept up at night by the demographic demon like me? Well, don't worry, because time is on our side. And here's the great news. And he shows you this image, and it says, 1960, the average Arab woman had 9 children. And this like, Arab woman with 9 children. And the average Jewish woman had 2.9 children. It's like, well, today, thanks to modernization and urbanization and all these policies, the average Arab woman only has 3.5 children. And the average Jewish woman has almost 3.5 children. So time is on our side. More good news. And then he names the ethnic cleansings, of course, which is celebrated. And then he says, and every year, if you survey the Palestinians, more than 40% of the young say they want to leave. And in fact, we see that 60,000 of them leave every year. So this is great news. Don't worry. And then you see this demographic devil shrink, and then he becomes a little puppy. And it goes, time is on our side. And this is what I have to, I mean, Israeli governments, one after another, have made life in Gaza impossible, with the intention of imposing what the Israeli generals call economic warfare. The reason why during the siege chocolate and spices and basic medical equipment was banned is because they want to make their lives so miserable they would live of their own accord. And in fact, we've seen that since the massacre this summer, an unprecedented number of Gazans are trying to immigrate out of Gaza. And of course, Europe doesn't want them, so I don't know where they will end up. The catastrophic situation there right now is just a testament to that. And that's, I think, part of the same larger strategy. Am I in trouble? No, largely I am still anonymous. Some fascists robbed me of my anonymity and kind of harassed me this summer, but I'm fine. It's actually, I'm lucky in a way to live in Israel because of the political situation. There is still a very lively political and social debate and activity, and there's still a chance for human experimentation. And this produces, of course, a lot of artists, a lot of critics, a lot of people. And today, it's fine. We'll see where it goes. I mean, we've seen critical professors fired and artists. And by and large, the artists are leaving the country. There's a huge exodus over the last decade of artists that go to Berlin and New York and lefty people in general. I'm not going to condemn the entire Israeli society to a bunch of ethnic cleansers. I think that at times, and we are just now starting to understand it, incredibly repressive genocidal ideologies take root. And it's the banality, as Hannah Arendt wrote, it's the banality of evil that really allows for these war crimes to happen. I think in retrospect, as a Jew, I'm a lot more interested in what the people of the village of Auschwitz were doing than the people in the Auschwitz camp. Why were they just quiet? Why did they just live their lives? And this is, I think, the greatest crime, is to be silent in the face of what's happening. But I'm not going to condemn all the Germans that they are genocidal ethnic cleansers. I think that destructive ideologies take root and they have reason. But yeah, I think largely what you said is true. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that the left collapsed, the liberal Zionist left collapsed. I don't know. I mean, every time someone says, oh, it looks like Israel-Palestine is going in this direction and it's probably going to lead to this outcome, every time they were wrong, and every time history went sideways, and we were all surprised. And we know from history that even brilliant minds like Michel Warshawski believed in the Oslo process. And now we see what the Oslo process was intended for and what it produced. And I think that the story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a story of shattered hopes. But there is no lack of honest people and there is no lack of intellectual genius. Still, we are losing. I don't think it's my achievement that Amnon was speaking. No. Amnon came to us. Amnon picked up the phone and told us, I want to talk. If I take any credit, it's for not turning off the camera when he said enough. I used to in the beginning. I didn't even bring the camera. I mean, we met with Amnon over 4 years, so I eventually understood the methodology of this denial. Is that, I would start talking to him about his wife and his kids, and then kind of like, oh, and then in 1948, and he was, yeah, expelled them all, and then I burned down the village. Which village? You mentioned Breo. Oh, no, I can't talk about that. And then I would say, oh, okay, all right, so I would turn off the camera. And then he would say, well, actually, in this village, so eventually I learned just keep the camera on. And in fact, he would say, up to here and no more. And then he would go forward. And then I think that there is some kind of need inside of a human being to get to the root of the thing, because I don't know what it's like for Amnon. I've never committed a war crime, but But I think it's incredibly terrifying knowing that this thing is inside you, and you know that the only way that you will be able to dig it out is if you shine light on it. So I think he did all of this work. He would say no more, and then he would go there. So I think it's his achievement. He's an incredible human being in my mind, very humble one. And when I showed him the film, it was another one of these steps, and his wife, unfortunately, Hannah, who you saw in the film, Hannah with the third cup, she's very ill now, and they are very, very love, and it's very difficult for him right now. One of the positive things also of the collapse of the so-called peace process is that in the last, also I would say since about March, almost a year now, we've seen a mushrooming effect of groups getting together exactly outside of the paradigm of the one or two-state solution, and in general what they're talking about is what they call the Swiss solution, a multinational democracy, where they kind of came to the conclusion that you're not going to convince the majority of Israelis that Zionism is a bad idea, so why don't we give some kind of space for that idea to go and be if they want it, but not at the expense of anybody else. And so it's the Swiss solution is kind of like this Switzerland type of democracy, where you have the rights of national groups protected, but in general, every person, one vote, and it's a very interesting turn of events, and some of our best minds actually are working on it. Also Hamburg, who's, okay, but Owen Iftachel, who I mentioned earlier, he's working on a group like that. There's also a lot of Swiss people working on it. This man called Friedrich Galtung, who I don't know if you know. And no, Friedrich Galtung, yeah. And sorry, Friedrich. And also Maron Rapoport, the Israeli journalist, and Jeff Halper. They're all kind of working in their own different groups, and it's Israeli intellectual leftists, so they're all fighting with each other, but they'll get to one sort of understanding, I think, soon. It's a very positive turn of events. I don't think Israel is full.
It's not full, okay.
I think that as far as the percentage of population to resources, there's a lot more populated, densely populated places. One of the most populated, obviously, is Gaza. But yes, Jewish immigrations have historically come at the expense of the indigenous population. When we came in 1991, it was during the Madrid talks, and the government used the Russian immigration to populate much of the West Bank. In fact, I remember the Ministry of Absorption would come and organize Russian language tours to Russians who are largely engineers, so they would come to the workplaces and encourage people to go on these tours to Ariel and to other settlements, encouraging people to move while they were negotiating away the West Bank. And with the Jews from the Arab world, they were populated in the peripheries. And one of the biggest projects right now is a project of the Israeli Minister of Interior called the Judification Project of the Galilee and the Negev, so the north and the south. And this is, I think, where they're going to try and divert the immigrants. Also, the Ukrainian conflict has seen a 140% rise in the number of Ukrainian Jews moving to Israel. And the government is constantly using these things as an excuse for Jews to move to Israel. But on another, from another perspective, I think that there's no lack of space. I think that there is a lack of political will. And what excites me and what I'm really passionate about is that there's now a ton of groups that are not busy talking about the ideas anymore, because we have any idea you can think about for a resolution. There's been a committee and experts, and they published papers and so on. And instead they're talking about, okay, now what? Let's say a solution happens, now what? And so we've seen, for example, architects. This Italian architect called Alessandro Preti, he opened a studio for architects in Beit Zahur near Bethlehem. And with Palestinian architects, they are taking different places and they're re-envisioning how you can create a different kind of architecture there. So they are taking settlements and they are redesigning the space of a settlement from being a colonial architecture to being a communal one. And they also do surveys, for example. This is a group of urban planners. And what they did is they took, because most of the 530 destroyed villages are still empty places. They're not replaced with Jewish villages, they're just standing empty, like the village that Tikva talked about. So they survey these places, they check where is the water sources and what can the land sustain and so on. And who lived there, where are they now, and how many children and grandchildren they have. And then they design these incredible communal villages sustainable, self-sustainable villages that could potentially go in those places and fit into the geographical space.
And bring the refugees
And
back.
yeah, and another group is redesigning Tel Aviv to be a city after the refugees return. So these kinds of projects are also happening. So I don't think there's a lack of space. I think there's a lack of political will.
How was it possible to film them without bringing yourself in danger or being arrested or threatened?
I don't know, I just did it.
It's democracy.
I don't know. I will tell you that two things work in my favor, I think. And to say something before that, I think Israel is a country of contradictions, a lot of strong contradictions. On the one hand, you have strong governmental repression of people that speak against, and especially Palestinians. For example, a 19-year-old guy wrote on his Facebook during this war in the summer, "Someday this hell will end." And he was arrested and put on house arrest for a month and a half. So there's that, and then there's other people like me that continue and do whatever they do. So it's full of contradictions, and it's for me it's fascinating contradictions. But two things work in my favor, I think. The first one is that Israel is primarily a country of chaos. So in the heat of things, I tend to kind of get lost. And another thing is that I'm a woman. And Israel is an incredibly misogynistic society. And when they see a girl in a dress with a camera, they don't think that I'm an international journalist who's going to publish these things. They think that I'm some idiot who stumbled onto the scene. And in fact, their patronizing attitude towards me has saved me many, many, many times. Now, we are recording this, so probably that freedom will end, but right now it's still true.